My name is Lena Hart, and at 32 I'd built a life the HOA president could only dream of. Head of cybersecurity analysis at a tech firm in Denver corner office overlooking the Rockies and completely independent from the petty tyrants who once tried to run my neighborhood like their personal kingdom. The text came through during my morning security briefing. I'd assigned Karen a special ringtone years ago, that sharp clinical beep that matched our relationship. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance down. Return the bench. The black one. You know which. Ray wants it back. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Ray. She still called her husband that, even though he'd never been anything close to a neighbor, let alone a decent human being. Ray Morrison had married Karen when I was 21 and moved into Eleanor's big corner lot with his construction worker hands and bourbon breath, immediately deciding the whole Pine Grove HOA needed his version of discipline. The bench? Of course she meant that bench. I closed my eyes and saw it sitting on my front porch. A simple black teak garden bench from the upscale garden store downtown. Nothing special to anyone else, but to me that bench was everything. I'd bought it with my first real paycheck from the campus IT help desk. Spent hours picking it out, running my hands over the wood I'd earned myself. No HOA approval, no strings, no conditions. Ms. Hart, my junior analyst Marcus, was looking at me with concern. Should we continue with the penetration test results? I pocketed my phone. Give me 5 minutes. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to process. Karen hadn't texted me in 8 months. The last time was to ask if I could help with Ray's latest emergency. Some bogus compliance fine he'd racked up on my property. I'd wired the money, like always, $4,000 transferred without a thank you or follow-up. Before that, it was Tyler's community college fees. Before that, roof repairs on the clubhouse, $37,000 over 10 years. I'd kept track in a spreadsheet, initially thinking I'd claim it on taxes as community support. But we both knew what it really was. Guilt money, hush money, the price of keeping my existence at a comfortable distance. And now she wanted the bench. I pulled out my phone and started typing a response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted. What could I possibly say? That she had no right, that Ray had forfeited any claim when he shoved me into that door frame, that calling him the voice of the HOA made me want to throw my phone across the bathroom. Instead, I wrote nothing. Let her wonder. Back in the conference room, I threw myself into the security audit with unnecessary intensity, but my mind kept drifting to that night 11 years ago. August, sticky Denver heat, the neighborhood smelling like fresh-cut grass, and Karen's nervous energy. I just moved into my first house on a full scholarship I'd earned through countless late nights debugging code and perfecting applications. Ray had been drinking, nothing new there. He'd made some comment about me thinking I was too good for Pine Grove now that I was heading into some fancy tech career. I'd ignored him like always, but then he'd stood up, pointed that thick finger at me. When I'm talking to you, you look at me and say, "Yes, sir." You hear me? I hear you, Ray. That's when everything shifted. Ray, I'm Ray now, not the rules. I'd never called him anything respectful. Not once in the 3 years he'd lorded over the HOA. He wasn't my anything. My real mentor had died when I was young, left behind nothing but a few photos and a last name Karen seemed eager to forget. You've never been in charge here, I said quietly, still not looking up from my laptop. The porch chair scraped against the concrete. Karen's sharp intake of breath, then his hand on my laptop screen, slamming it closed, nearly catching my fingers. The HOA and I have kept this neighborhood perfect, clothed it in rules, kept a roof of compliance over your ungrateful head. I've had a job since I was 14. I buy my own furniture, I pay for my own everything. What exactly? That's when he grabbed my arm and yanked me up from the bench. Karen stood frozen by the railing, dish towel in her hands, watching as Ray dragged me toward my own front door. You want to disrespect the rules in this HOA? This isn't your yard. I tried to pull away. This is my property. His name is still on the original deed. You're just the guy, Karen. The door frame caught me right between the shoulder blades. Pain shot down my spine as Ray held me there, his face inches from mine, breath hot with beer and rage. You apologize right now, or you can find somewhere else to live. I looked past him to Karen. She was still holding that dish towel, wringing it between her hands. Our eyes met for just a moment before she looked away. "Let her go, Ray," she said softly, so softly it barely counted as defending me. "She's new anyway." He released me with a shove that sent me stumbling. "Not under HOA rules, she's not. Not unless she shows some respect." That night I packed everything I could fit in my car clothes, laptop, the few photos of my real mentor, and that black bench still in its delivery box with the receipt tucked inside. I left while they were at the monthly meeting the next morning, crashing on friends' couches until the fines stopped piling up 2 weeks later. Karen called once a week after I'd left. "You need to apologize to Ray. He's willing to let you stay if you just say you're sorry." "For what?" I'd asked. "For being disrespectful. For causing trouble. For making things difficult." I'd hung up on her. It was the last real conversation we'd had in 11 years. Now sitting in my Denver office, successful beyond anything they could have imagined, she wanted the bench. The audacity of it made my hands shake. My phone buzzed again. "Eleanor's funeral is Thursday. I assume you won't be there." I stared at the words until they swam. Eleanor, the only person in this neighborhood who'd ever stood up for me, who'd slipped me 20s when Karen wasn't looking, who'd told me I was smart enough to be anything I wanted. Who'd whispered, "You get out of here, baby," when she hugged me goodbye that last time. Dead. And Karen was just mentioning it as an afterthought, an assumption I wouldn't care enough to come. But she was wrong. I'd be there, and I'd be sitting on that black bench in spirit if not in body. The memory of that door frame had lived in my body for 11 years. Sometimes when I stretched wrong or slept in an awkward position, I'd feel that spot between my shoulder blades flare up, a phantom pain that no amount of success could erase. I was 21 then, just a kid trying to survive in a neighborhood that already had its king and queen. Ray Morrison had been on the board for 2 years, and I'd learned early to stay quiet, stay invisible, stay out of his way. But something about that night, maybe it was the job offer letter sitting on my desk upstairs, or the acceptance email from Secure Tech, or just the exhaustion of pretending this man had any authority over my yard, made me snap. The confrontation had been building since he'd married Karen. Ray liked to play king of the HOA in a community he didn't own, making rules about benches and flags and respect while contributing nothing but noise and intimidation. Karen had met him at her hospital job. He'd come in for a work injury. And somehow she'd seen husband material in a man who complained about his workers' comp and leered at the nurses. "He's stable," she told me when she announced they were getting married. "He's got a steady job. He owns his truck outright. The neighborhood needs that kind of security." What we needed was for her to stop confusing control with caring. But I'd already learned that Karen heard what she wanted to hear. The bench, that stupid beautiful bench, had been my first act of rebellion. Though I hadn't seen it that way at the time, I'd been working at the campus computer lab since sophomore year, saving everything I could for house expenses. But when I got my first full paycheck from my new position as lab supervisor, I'd done something just for me. I'd driven to the Cherry Creek Mall, walked into the garden store like I belonged there, and spent 2 hours trying out outdoor furniture. The black teak bench was perfect, sophisticated but not flashy, appropriate for morning coffee or quiet reflection. When I looked at myself sitting on it in the display yard, I didn't see the girl who ate lunch in the library to avoid Ray's noon patrols. I saw someone with a future. $78. That's what my freedom cost. I'd placed it exactly once before that night on my front porch for my National Honor Society induction. Karen had come, sat in the back left before the reception. Ray hadn't bothered. "Bunch of nerds congratulating themselves," he'd said. But Eleanor had been there, front row, taking pictures with her ancient digital camera. "You look like a CEO," she'd whispered when she hugged me after. "Like someone who's going places." The night Ray slammed me into the door frame, the bench was sitting on my porch in its protective cover, waiting for the world to see. After his hands left bruises on my arms and his words left deeper marks I couldn't see, I'd stood in my yard shaking and stared at it. Evidence that I was more than this neighborhood, this HOA, this life they'd built around me like a cage. When I packed my car the next morning, the bench went in first. Karen's call a week later had been brief but revealing. She'd framed it as concern, but I could hear Ray coaching her in the background. "Tell her she needs to show respect. Tell her this is what happens when kids think they're too smart. Tell her she's not getting any help for her mortgage unless she apologizes. I don't need your help, I'd said. I have a full scholarship. That won't cover everything. Books, food, utilities. I'll figure it out. And I had. Work-study jobs, summer internships, sharing textbooks, living on ramen and cafeteria leftovers. I'd made it work because the alternative was crawling back to that neighborhood and calling Ray sir like he'd demanded, like my actual mentor had never existed, like respect could be fined into someone instead of earned. The bench became my armor. I sat on it for my first internship interview at a cybersecurity firm, for my senior thesis presentation for the career fair where I met the recruiter who'd eventually hire me at Secure Tech. Every time I sat on it, I remembered that I'd bought it myself, chosen it myself, saved it from a neighborhood where nothing really belonged to me. Freshman year, living in the dorms, I'd sometimes wake up in a panic thinking I heard Ray's truck in the parking lot. But gradually the fear faded into something else. Determination. While my classmates were partying, I was in the computer lab learning programming languages like they were escape routes. While they were pledging sororities, I was building a network of professors and mentors who saw my potential. Karen reached out sporadically those first few years, always when she needed something. Could I help with Ray's truck payment? They were behind on clubhouse utilities. Their son Tyler needed school supplies. She never asked how I was doing. Never mentioned the night I left. Never acknowledged that her husband had driven a new homeowner from her own yard. I sent money when I could, hating myself for it, but unable to fully cut the cord. Each transfer came with a sick feeling in my stomach, but also a twisted sense of power. I was the one with resources now. I was the one they needed. The bench went everywhere with me, from my cramped dorm room to my first shared apartment to my eventual one-bedroom in Capitol Hill. It survived 5 moves, 3 job changes, and countless pressure wash cycles. Sometimes I'd catch sight of it on my porch and remember 21-year-old me buying it with such hope, having no idea it would become the symbol of everything I'd overcome. Ray never apologized. Of course he didn't. Men like Ray don't apologize. They just wait for the neighborhood to bend to their will. Karen never apologized either, though her silence was its own kind of statement. She'd chosen her side that night on my porch, and we'd all been living with the consequences ever since. But Eleanor had called me the morning after I left. I was sitting in my friend Sarah's kitchen trying not to cry into my coffee when my phone rang. "You did the right thing," she'd said without preamble. "Don't you dare go back there. You're stronger than all of them put together." "I don't feel strong," I'd admitted. "Strength isn't about feeling it, baby. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you're scared. And you're doing it." She'd sent me cards every month that first year of homeownership, little notes of encouragement tucked inside with $20 bills I tried to refuse and couldn't. She was the only neighborhood member at my graduation, driving herself 6 hours, even though Karen had forbidden her from encouraging Lena's selfishness. Now she was gone, and Karen was texting me about a bench like it was just another transaction, like 11 years of absence could be reduced to a demand for property that was never theirs to begin with. I looked at the photo on my desk, Eleanor and me at graduation. Both of us beaming. Me in my cap and gown, and yes, that black bench in the background of the picture she'd insisted on taking. She'd taken me to dinner after to a fancy restaurant where she'd ordered champagne even though she didn't drink. To my neighbor she toasted loud enough for other tables to hear, who got herself out and made something of herself. "Your mentor would be so proud." It was the only time in years anyone had mentioned my real mentor with love instead of dismissal. I'd cried into my champagne, and Eleanor had reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Don't you ever let them make you small," she'd said. "You're bigger than their tiny rules, and they know it. That's why they tried to break you. But look at you now. Look at me now," I thought, staring at Karen's text, successful, independent, and still somehow expected to hand over pieces of myself on demand. But Eleanor's funeral changed things. I wouldn't just be the absent homeowner anymore. I'd show up and let them see exactly what they'd pushed away. The bench wasn't just wood and teak. It was proof that I'd survived, thrived, built a life they couldn't touch, and they'd have to pry it off my cold, dead porch before I'd give it back to the man who tried to break me for refusing to call the HOA rules sir. I flew into Denver International on Wednesday night, renting a car for the drive to my childhood neighborhood in Aurora. The black bench sat secured in the back of the rental with straps I'd bought specially pressed and perfect. I considered bringing something else, anything else. But Eleanor deserved to see me with the piece that represented everything she'd believed I could become. The community clubhouse parking lot was fuller than I'd expected. Eleanor had touched a lot of lives. Church friends, neighbors, the women from her book club. I sat in my rental car for 10 minutes watching people file in. None of them neighbors I recognized immediately. Finally, I smoothed down my dress, touched up my lipstick, and walked through the doors. The smell hit me first, that clubhouse cocktail of flowers and air freshener that made my stomach turn. The second thing I noticed was the display board covered in photos. Eleanor through the decades, smiling, laughing, living. I searched for any of the two of us together and found none. "Can I help you?" A funeral director appeared at my elbow, professionally somber. "I'm here for Eleanor Morrison's service. I'm her neighbor." His eyes flicked to his clipboard. "Oh, I don't see you on the resident list. Are you Lena Hart?" I kept my voice steady. Eleanor Morrison was my neighbor. "I see. Well, the board is gathering in the Rosewood room just down the hall to your left." The Rosewood room was small, intimate. Karen sat in the front row between Ray and Tyler, their son who I'd last seen when he was 12. He was 23 now, broad-shouldered like his father, wearing an ill-fitting suit. None of them looked up when I entered. I took a seat in the back row. Other board members filtered in, Ray's sister and her kids. Some distant neighbors from Karen's side I barely remembered. They all glanced at me with varying degrees of recognition and discomfort before looking away. The service was starting in 15 minutes. I watched Karen accept condolences. Watched her dab at her eyes with tissues. Watched her lean into Ray's shoulder for support. The grieving president supported by her loving husband. It was a performance worthy of an award. "Lena." A soft voice made me turn. Aunt Patricia, Karen's younger sister, stood in the aisle. She'd moved to California years ago, smart enough to put distance between herself and the neighborhood dysfunction. "Hi, Aunt Pat." She sat beside me, studying my face. "You look good, honey. Successful." "Thanks. I'm doing well. I heard Eleanor used to brag about you. Said you were some kind of computer genius making good money out in Denver." She talked about me. Patricia's laugh was bitter. "Only when Karen wasn't around. You know how that goes." I did know. The neighborhood dynamics hadn't changed, just calcified into harder patterns. "The bench looks nice," Patricia added quietly. "I remember when Eleanor told me about it, how proud you looked sitting on it at some neighborhood thing." So Eleanor had shared that moment, kept it alive in the neighborhood memory, even if Karen tried to erase me. The knowledge made my throat tight. The funeral director appeared at the front of the room. "If everyone could take their seats, we'll begin momentarily." Patricia squeezed my hand before moving to sit with other residents. I stayed in the back, invisible, forgotten exactly where they'd placed me. The service began with a pastor I didn't recognize talking about Eleanor Morrison as if he'd known her intimately. He spoke of her devotion to the neighborhood, her love for her president and son-in-law, her joy in her grandson. Singular, one grandson, Tyler. I existed in the eraser, in the space between words, in the careful editing of a life to fit the narrative they'd all agreed upon. When the pastor called for neighborhood members to share memories, Karen stood first. "My mother-in-law was my best friend," she began, voice trembling. "She supported me through everything, especially when I remarried and blended our HOA. She loved Ray like a son and Tyler like her only neighbor." The words hit like physical blows. I watched Karen's performance. Watched her revise history in real time. In her version, there was no new homeowner driven from her yard. No neighbor who'd made Eleanor proud. No fracture in the perfect community portrait. Ray spoke next, calling Eleanor Mom with an easy familiarity that made my skin crawl. He talked about how she'd welcomed him into the HOA, how grateful he was for her acceptance. Tyler mumbled through a short speech about Eleanor attending his baseball games. "Are there any other neighborhood members who'd like to speak?" the pastor asked. I stood. The room shifted, a collective intake of breath as heads turned. Karen's face went white, then red. Ray's jaw clenched, but I was already walking to the front, my heels clicking on the clubhouse carpet. My name is Lena Hart, I said into the microphone. Eleanor Morrison was my neighbor. Silence. Heavy, expectant silence. Eleanor taught me that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting up every time, even when the people who should protect the neighborhood are the ones who knocked you down. I looked directly at Karen. She taught me that blood doesn't always mean community, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave. Karen's hands were shaking. Ray had half risen from his seat. When I graduated from college, Eleanor drove 6 hours to be there. When I got my first promotion, she was the first person I called. When I bought my condo, she sent me a housewarming card with a $100 bill and a note that said, "For something beautiful from someone who always knew you were." My voice cracked, but I pushed through. The last time I saw her, she told me she was proud of me. Not for my job or my degrees or my success. She was proud that I'd had the courage to save myself when no one else would. She said I paused, meeting Ray's furious gaze. She said my mentor would have been proud too. My real mentor, the one whose name I carry. That's enough. Ray was fully standing now. No, I said calmly. It's not. Eleanor deserves to have her whole truth told, not just the convenient parts. She had 2 neighbors. She loved us both, even if one of us was erased from the community story. I turned back to the room, to the stunned faces of distant residents and neighborhood friends. Eleanor Morrison was the only person in this HOA who chose love over control, who chose truth over comfort, who chose to see me when everyone else chose to look away. She saved my life by telling me it was okay to leave. And I'll honor her memory by telling the truth she never got to say out loud. I stepped away from the microphone and walked back to my seat, legs steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. The pastor fumbled through closing remarks while Karen sobbed real tears now. But not for Eleanor, for the careful fiction I just shattered in front of everyone. When the service ended, people filed out slowly, many stopping to stare at me or whisper among themselves. I stayed seated until the room was nearly empty, then stood to say my private goodbye to Eleanor. Karen intercepted me at the door. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth. You abandoned this neighborhood. You don't get to come back, and I was 21. My voice was ice, a new homeowner, and you let him hurt me because it was easier than protecting the community. You were disrespectful. I was your neighbor. The words hung between us. And you chose him. Ray appeared at her shoulder, face mottled with rage. You need to leave now. I'm not 21 anymore, Ray. You can't throw me out of public places. The bench, Karen said suddenly. You brought it on purpose to mock us. I almost laughed, even now at Eleanor's funeral. She was fixated on that bench. I brought it because Eleanor loved seeing me sit on it. Because it represents everything she wanted for me. Independence, success, freedom from people like you. People like Ray stepped forward. Eleanor loved me. I was more family to her than you ever were. Is that why she left me the house? The words fell out before I'd planned to say them. But watching their faces shift from anger to shock to disbelief was worth the premature revelation. What? Karen's voice was barely a whisper. Her lawyer called me last week. Didn't you wonder why you haven't heard from him yet? She left me the house. The one with my mentor's name still on the deed. The one you've been living in rent-free for over a decade. It was a guess, but their faces told me I was right. They hadn't heard from the lawyer yet. Eleanor had made sure I'd know first. You're lying, but Karen's voice wavered. Ask the lawyer. I'm sure he'll be in touch soon. I moved past them toward the door. Oh, and Karen, I'll be keeping the bench. Consider it payment for the $47,000 I've given you over the years, though. Really, it's worth so much more than that. I left them standing there in the clubhouse doorway, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. In the parking lot, I sat in my rental car and cried for Eleanor, for the 21-year-old girl who'd had to save herself for all the years of community I'd never get back. But they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of release. Eleanor's final gift wasn't just the house. It was permission to stop trying to earn a place in a neighborhood that had already written me out of their story. I drove back to my hotel. The black bench, still perfect, still mine, still symbolizing everything they'd never been able to take from me. Tomorrow I'd meet with Eleanor's lawyer. Tonight I'd raise a glass of champagne to the woman who'd loved me enough to let me go and trusted me enough to give me the last word. Back in my hotel room, I hung the black bench carefully in the corner and opened my laptop. The funeral had shaken something loose in me. A need to quantify exactly what this bench meant, not just emotionally but practically. If Karen wanted to reduce our relationship to transactions, I'd show her the real ledger. I pulled up my financial records, the ones I'd been keeping since homeownership. At first, tracking the money I sent to the HOA had been about taxes, hoping to claim community support deductions. But over the years it became something else, evidence, proof of a relationship that only flowed one direction. The folder was labeled neighborhood expenses in my cloud drive, neutral, clinical, like everything else about how I'd learned to manage my connection to them. I opened the spreadsheet and started from the beginning. March 2015, $500 for Karen's car repair. I'd been surviving on ramen and campus food bank visits, but she'd called crying about needing to get to work. July 2015, $1,200 for Tyler's school expenses. He would have been 13 then. I later found out from Aunt Patricia the money went to Ray's DUI lawyer. December 2016, $2,000 for Christmas and fines. I'd spent that Christmas alone in my dorm room eating Chinese takeout while they enjoyed the holiday I'd helped finance. The numbers added up year after year, 500 here, 1,000 there, sometimes more. Always with a story, always urgent, always with the unspoken understanding that this was what neighbors did. Never mind that neighborhood was supposed to be reciprocal. The largest single transfer was in 2019, $8,000 for Ray's dental work. Karen had called me sobbing, saying he was in so much pain he couldn't work, that they'd lose the clubhouse if he couldn't get back to enforcement jobs. I'd emptied half my emergency fund and eaten beans and rice for 3 months to build it back up. There was no thank you card, no follow-up call, just another request 6 months later for Tyler's community college tuition. By my count, I transferred $47,832 to Karen over 10 years. That didn't include the birthday cards I'd sent Tyler with money tucked inside never acknowledged, or the groceries I'd had delivered during COVID when Karen mentioned offhand that Ray's hours had been cut. $47,000. I could have used that for a bigger down payment on my condo. Could have traveled, invested more aggressively, or just not spent years anxiously checking my bank balance after each transfer. But the real cost wasn't monetary. It was in the therapy sessions where I unpacked why I felt obligated to buy their love. The relationships I'd sabotaged because I didn't know how to accept care without suspicion. The times I'd worked myself sick because financial security felt like the only real safety net. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Denver sprawled out below. Lights twinkling in the darkness. This city had saved me, given me opportunities to build a life where my worth wasn't contingent on how quietly I could disappear. The bench sat in the corner like a talisman. $78 at the garden store in 2013. The first thing I'd ever bought that was purely for future me, not survival me. When I sat on it for that National Honor Society induction, I'd felt like I was sitting on possibility itself. Karen's fixation on it made more sense now. It wasn't about the bench. It was about what it represented. Every time I succeeded while sitting on it, I proved that their narrative was wrong. I wasn't the disrespectful homeowner who needed Ray's firm hand. I was the woman who'd gotten out, who'd made something of herself without their help, in spite of their harm. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Tyler. Karen gave me your number. Can we talk?" I stared at the message. Tyler had been 12 when I left. Caught in the crossfire of a war he didn't start. Part of me wanted to protect him from the truth. The other part remembered that protection without honesty was just another cage. I'm at the Hampton in room 412. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. Tyler stood in the hallway, looking uncomfortable in his funeral suit. He was taller than Ray now, but carried himself with the same uncertain energy I remembered from his childhood, always trying to take up less space than his body required. "Thanks for seeing me," he said. I gestured him inside. He sat on the chair by the desk, hands clasped between his knees. "I'm sorry about Eleanor," I offered. "Yeah, me too," he paused, seeming to gather courage. I remember you. You know, Karen and Dad always said you chose to leave, that you thought you were too good for the neighborhood. But I remember. What do you remember? The night before you left, I heard the fight. Heard Dad Ray yelling, heard something hit the wall. Karen told me the next morning you decided to leave for your new job early, but your car was already gone, and your yard was empty except for the furniture. My throat tightened. I didn't want to leave you. I know. He looked up at me then, and I saw our shared Karen in his features, but also something else. A questioning, a refusal to accept easy answers. I found your graduation announcement in Karen's drawer when I was 16. She'd never told me you graduated. I looked you up online. Found out you were working at some big tech company. Started to wonder what else they hadn't told me. Tyler, Eleanor used to talk about you when they weren't around. Said you were brilliant, that you'd made something of yourself. She showed me pictures once, you sitting on that black bench at some work thing. You looked happy, successful, nothing like the selfish brat Dad always described. The bench, even in secret, it had been telling my story. I'm not here to turn you against them, I said carefully. You don't have to. I'm 23, Lena. I see how they are. I've been seeing it for years. He laughed bitterly. You know, Dad makes me call him sir. Still, even now, and Karen just watches like she always has. Why are you still there? Where else would I go? I barely finished community college work part-time at a warehouse. Dad says I'm lucky he lets me stay rent-free, though I pay for groceries and utilities. Says I should be grateful. I saw myself in him, then trapped by circumstances and the insidious voice that said this was what neighborhood meant, but also saw the difference. He was questioning it, pushing back in small ways, looking for cracks in the foundation. The house, I said suddenly. Eleanor left it to me. His eyes widened. Seriously, I just found out. Haven't decided what to do with it yet. Dad's going to lose his mind. He's been talking about selling it after Eleanor died. Using the money to buy a truck for his new contracting business. Of course he had. Ray had been spending inheritance money in his mind before Eleanor was even buried. Tyler, can I ask you something? What do you know about my mentor? My biological mentor? He shifted uncomfortably. Not much. Karen doesn't talk about him. There's no pictures or anything. Dad always said he was a deadbeat who abandoned you both. Another lie. My mentor had died in a car accident when I was 2. He'd been coming home from his shift at the hospital. He'd been a radiologic technologist. Had just gotten promoted. Eleanor told me the truth when I was 21. Showed me his obituary she'd saved. He'd been 26 years old, excited about being a mentor, planning to buy a house for his young family. He died, I told Tyler. Car accident. He never abandoned anyone. Tyler's face went through several expressions. Surprise, anger, a dawning understanding of just how deep the lies went. Why would they? Because Ray needed to be the only authority figure. Needed me grateful for his presence instead of resentful of his intrusion. Hard to demand I call the rules, sir, if I'm allowed to honor my actual mentor's memory. Tyler ran his hands through his hair. Sorry. This is a lot. I know. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, but you deserve the truth. You deserve to make informed decisions about your life. He was quiet for a long moment. Then the bench. Karen's obsessed with it. Keep saying you stole it. That it belongs to the neighborhood. But it's yours, isn't it? You bought it yourself. First paycheck from my campus job. $78 plus tax. I have the receipt somewhere. She made it sound like it was some designer thing worth thousands. I almost laughed. Karen had built up the bench in her mind until it became something else entirely, a symbol of my defiance, my independence, my refusal to play by their rules. In her version, I'd stolen something precious from the neighborhood. In reality, I just bought myself something nice with money I'd earned. It's from the garden store. It's worth maybe $30 now, if that. But she's right that it's valuable, just not in the way she thinks. Tyler stood to leave, then paused at the door. Eleanor left me something too. A letter. Haven't opened it yet, but I think maybe it's time I did. I think that's a good idea, Tyler. I'm glad you came back, even if it's just for this. It's good to know the whole story. After he left, I sat on the hotel bed processing. Tyler was trapped in the same cycle, but he was aware of it. That had to count for something. Maybe Eleanor had seen it too. Left him his own keys to freedom. I pulled out my laptop again, opened a new document. If Karen wanted the bench back so badly, I'd give her an itemized bill for what she actually owed me. $47,000 plus interest plus therapy costs plus 11 years of missed block parties and celebrations they'd excluded me from. The bench was mine, bought with money I'd earned, representing a future I'd built myself. It had witnessed my evolution from scared homeowner to successful professional. It had been my armor in job interviews, my confidence in presentations, my reminder that I was more than their small definitions. Tomorrow I'd meet with the lawyer about the house, but tonight I raised a glass of overpriced hotel wine to Eleanor, to Tyler's awakening, to the 21-year-old girl who'd known instinctively that a simple black bench could mean everything. They could demand it back all they wanted, but like my dignity, my success, and my truth, it was never theirs to take. The lawyer's office was in an old Victorian house converted to professional suites, the kind of place that smelled like leather and old paper. Mr. Jameson had been Eleanor's attorney for 20 years, and his assistant had sounded surprised when I called to confirm our appointment. "She always spoke highly of you," he said after I'd settled into the client chair. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, though I gather there's been some distance in the neighborhood. That's one way to put it. He pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Your neighbor was very specific in her instructions. She updated her will 6 months ago. Actually said she wanted to make sure everything was ironclad. 6 months ago. That would have been right after Christmas, the Christmas I'd sent money but hadn't visited. Citing work obligations that were really just excuses to avoid Ray. Yes, she came in right after the holidays. Very determined. Said she'd had a revelation about some things." He adjusted his glasses. "She left you the house at 4847 Pine Grove. Free and clear. The deed was in both her name and your late mentor's. She never removed him. She said you'd understand why." I did understand. It was Eleanor's way of keeping my mentor's presence in the family asset, of acknowledging the inheritance that should have flowed naturally from mentor to child if he'd lived. "There's more, Mr. Jameson continued. She also left you this." He pulled out an envelope, my name written across it in Eleanor's shaky handwriting. "And there's a safety deposit box at First National. Here's the key and authorization." I took the envelope and key with trembling hands. "What about the rest of the neighborhood? Karen receives her china set and jewelry box. Your half-neighbor Tyler gets $5,000 for educational purposes and her car. Mr. Morrison, your HOA enforcer, isn't mentioned in the will. He's going to contest this. He can try. But as I said, your neighbor was very specific. She had me draft language explicitly stating that the house was to go to you as the child of her deceased friend, restoring the inheritance that would have naturally passed from him. It's legally bulletproof." I thought about Ray's plans to sell the house, fund his new business venture with money he'd already counted as his. The rage would be volcanic. "There's one more thing, Mr. Jameson said. Your neighbor included a provision that if anyone contests the will, they forfeit their portion entirely. It's called a no contest clause. Fairly common in situations where neighborhood dynamics are complicated." Smart. I thought Eleanor had known exactly how they'd react and planned accordingly. I left the office with the envelope unopened, the key heavy in my pocket. First National was 2 blocks away, and I walked slowly, trying to process it all. The house alone was worth at least $400,000 in the current market, a life-changing inheritance that Eleanor had protected for me despite 11 years of absence. The bank manager led me to the safety deposit box room, giving me privacy once the box was retrieved. I sat at the small table, staring at the metal container that held whatever Eleanor had thought important enough to lock away. Inside were documents, my mentor's death certificate, his college diploma, photos I'd never seen of him holding baby me. There was also a small velvet box containing his wedding ring and a folded letter dated just 6 months ago. "My dearest Lena, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you finally come home. I've watched you build your life from afar. Proud beyond words, but heartbroken at the distance between us. Karen will never admit she was wrong. And Ray will never acknowledge what he took from you. But I need you to know that I saw it all. The night you left I was awake. I heard the fight. Heard him slam you into that door frame. Heard Karen's silence. I should have intervened then. Should have stood up to them both. My greatest regret is that I let fear keep me quiet when you needed an advocate. The house belongs to you. It always should have. Your mentor would have wanted you to have something solid in this world. I've kept his name on the deed all these years as a reminder that you have a claim here no matter what stories they tell. I've been putting money aside for Tyler hoping to help him the way I couldn't help you. But I see now that he needs truth more than cash. Whatever you decide about the house, please help him understand that there are other ways to be in this world than afraid. You asked me once why I stayed close to them after what they did. The truth is I was selfish. I wanted to see my neighbors even if one was kept from me. But I also stayed to bear witness to remember the truth when everyone else was content with lies. That black bench you bought. I remember when you sat on it for your NHS induction. You looked like your mentor that night, confident and capable and ready to take on the world. I knew then that you'd be okay, that you'd save yourself since we'd failed to save you. Don't give it back, sweetheart. Don't give any of yourself back to people who never deserved you in the first place. All my love. I sat in that small room and cried for her, for my mentor, for all the years we'd lost to other people's pride and cruelty. When I finally opened her letter to Tyler, it was shorter but no less powerful. Tyler, the truth matters. Ask your neighbor. Love. Eleanor. I gathered everything back into the box, keeping my mentor's ring and the photos but leaving the rest for now. There was something else I needed to do. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not the itemized bill I'd planned last night, but something different. A blog post on my rarely used Medium account titled The $78 Bench, a story about neighborhood money and what we really inherit. I wrote about buying the bench with my first paycheck, about sitting on it as armor in a world that wanted me small, about sending $47,000 to a neighborhood that couldn't send respect in return, about a neighbor who died protecting my inheritance from the people who should have protected me. I didn't use their names, changed enough details to maintain plausible deniability, but anyone who knew us would recognize the story. More importantly, other people trapped in similar cycles might recognize themselves. The post went live at 4 p.m. By 6 p.m., my phone was exploding. Karen, take it down now. Ray, you ungrateful, you'll be hearing from my lawyer Tyler. Holy Karen's losing it. But also thank you, Aunt Patricia. About damn time someone told the truth. Unknown number. Is this Lena? I went to school with you. Your story made me cry. I left my HOA at 21 too. Thank you for sharing this. By 10 p.m., the post had been shared hundreds of times. Comments poured in from others who'd bought their own versions of my bench, thrift store patio sets, graduation chairs, first cars that meant freedom, people who'd learned that neighborhood was about choice, not rules, and that sometimes the price of peace was everything you had to give. Karen called at midnight. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. You've ruined everything, she said without preamble. I told the truth. Your truth, your version. You don't know what I've been through, what I've had to. I know you chose him over me. That's all that matters. I chose stability. I chose keeping the neighborhood together. You chose wrong. The silence stretched between us. Years of unspoken things crowding the connection. The house. She finally said, you can't really mean to take it. It's already mine. Eleanor made sure of that. We'll contest it. Ray knows lawyers. Read the will, Karen. You contest it, you lose everything. Even the china set you're getting gone. Is it worth it? Another pause. I could hear her breathing. The same anxious rhythm from that night on my porch. The bench, she whispered. Just give back the bench. It's all I asked for. Why? Why does it matter so much? Because every time I see it in pictures, every time Patricia mentions it, every time I remember you sitting on it, I see my failure. I see the homeowner who got away, who made something of herself without us. Do you know how that feels? Yes, I said simply. I know exactly how it feels to be failed by your HOA president. She hung up. I sat on the hotel bed still in the black outfit I'd worn to the lawyer's office and pulled up the blog post stats. Over 1,000 shares, now messages from strangers finding courage in my story. A DM from a reporter asking if I'd be willing to be interviewed for a piece on neighborhood estrangement and financial abuse. The bench had done its job once again, given me the strength to tell my truth, but it had become bigger than just my story. It was every first-generation success story, every homeowner who'd saved themselves, every person who'd bought their own armor with money no one could take back. Tomorrow I'd drive by the house, my house, and decide what to do with it. Tomorrow I'd figure out how to help Tyler escape his own cage. Tomorrow I'd start the legal proceedings to protect what Eleanor had left me. But tonight I ordered room service and champagne, toasted my mentor's memory with his ring on a chain around my neck, and read every single comment from people who'd found hope in a $78 bench and the girl who'd refused to give it back. The bench sat in the corner waiting for whatever came next. It had been my freedom, my armor, my proof of survival. Now it was my flag planted firmly in the ground of my own life, declaring that some things, dignity, truth, self-worth, weren't for sale at any price. The invitation came through Tyler, texted at 7 a.m. On Friday. Karen wants to meet all of us tomorrow at 2 p.m. At the house. She says to discuss things like adults. Ray will be there. I stared at the message over my morning coffee. 3 days had passed since the blog post went viral. Since Karen's midnight call, since the world had shifted on its axis. My phone had been silent from their end after that initial explosion, which worried me more than the angry texts had. Tell her I'll be there, I typed back, then added, are you okay? Been staying at a friend's. It's been intense here. I could imagine Ray's control depended on silence, on the neighborhood accepting his version of reality. My post had shattered that, exposed the dynamics to sunlight. Men like him didn't handle exposure well. Saturday arrived, gray and drizzling, fitting weather for what felt like a final confrontation. I dressed carefully. Black slacks, white silk blouse, and yes, the spirit of the bench worn as a sophisticated jacket. If they wanted to discuss things like adults, I'd show them what an adult looked like. The house looked exactly the same. Yellow siding faded to beige, front porch sagging, slightly raised, truck dominating the driveway, but now it was mine, or would be once the paperwork cleared. The knowledge sat strange in my chest, like wearing shoes a size too big. Tyler answered the door. He looked exhausted. Stress written in the dark circles under his eyes. There in the living room, he said quietly. Been arguing all morning about strategy. The living room hadn't changed either. Same brown couch, same photos on the mantel. None of me. I noticed same smell of cigarettes and Febreze. Karen sat rigid in her armchair while Ray paced by the window. They both turned when I entered. Sit, Ray commanded, pointing to the couch. I remained standing. I'm fine here. Thanks. His jaw clenched, but Karen touched his arm, a warning. They definitely discussed strategy. Lena, Karen began, her voice forcibly calm. We need to discuss this situation rationally. Which situation? The inheritance. The blog post. The $47,000 I've given you over the years. The house? Ray interjected. You can't seriously intend to throw us out of our home. Your home? I pulled out my phone, showed them the email from Mr. Jameson confirming the deed transfer was in progress. According to the county records, it's about to be my home. Has been in my family since before you ever entered it. Your family. Ray's voice rose. I've been more family to Karen than my dead mentor. Is that what you were going to say? Silence. Karen looked at her hands. Tyler shifted uncomfortably by the door. Here's what I don't understand, I continued, keeping my voice steady. You had everything you wanted. I was gone out of your hair, living my life. I still sent money whenever you asked. I stayed away like you clearly preferred. So why the bench? Why demand the one thing that was purely mine? Karen finally looked up. It was Ray's idea. Donna. Ray's warning was sharp, but she kept going. Words spilling out like water through a broken dam. He saw that photo Patricia posted on Facebook. You at some tech conference sitting on the bench standing at a podium. He said it wasn't right. You out there showing off while we struggled. Said you owed us for all those years of raising the neighborhood. I raised myself from 21 on, I said quietly. Working after school, buying my own furniture, paying for my own everything. What exactly did I owe you for? We kept a roof over your head, Ray started. My mentor's roof in my neighbor's house. Neither of which you paid for. I paid utilities, insurance, maintenance while living rent-free for 15 years. Do you want me to calculate fair market rent for that period? Because I guarantee you've come out ahead. Tyler made a small sound, surprise or maybe admiration. Karen's face had gone pale. This is what you've driven us to, she said. Talking about neighborhood like it's a business transaction. You texted me about a bench before telling me my neighbor died. You've been treating our relationship like a transaction for over a decade because you abandoned us. The words hung in the air. Finally, the real accusation. I was 21, I said, a new homeowner. And I pointed at Ray, assaulted me, slammed me into a door frame because I wouldn't call him sir. And you watched. You chose him over protecting your community. You were disrespectful. I was a homeowner. My voice cracked despite my control. Your neighbor. And you let him put his hands on me because it was easier than standing up to him. That's not, I never. Karen was crying now, but they were tears of frustration, not remorse. You don't understand what it was like. Single president working full-time trying to keep everything together. Ray offered stability. Ray offered control dressed up as care, and you were so desperate for someone else to make decisions that you didn't notice when control became abuse. Abuse. Ray stepped forward. I never abused anyone. I provided discipline to a spoiled brat who stopped. Tyler's voice cut through the room. We all turned to look at him. Just stop. Lena's right. We all know she's right. I've watched you bully Karen for years. Control every dollar, every decision. And Karen, you let him. You let him drive Lena away. And you've let him keep me trapped here. Tyler. Karen reached out to him, but he stepped back. I read Eleanor's letter, he continued. She told me to ask Lena for the truth. Well, I did. And you know what? I learned that my whole life has been built on lies. That I have a neighbor who succeeded despite you. Not because of you. That the man I've been forced to call sir for 23 years is just a bully who found a vulnerable president and her kids to control. Ray's face had gone purple. You ungrateful little. What are you going to do? Ray, throw me out. Newsflash. The house isn't yours anymore. None of this is yours. You're just a parasite who's been living off my neighbor's fear and my Eleanor's patience. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen sobbed quietly while Ray stood frozen, perhaps for the first time realizing that his kingdom was built on sand. Here's what's going to happen, I said, pulling out the documents I'd brought. I'm not going to evict you immediately. You'll have 90 days to find alternative housing. That's more than the law requires. But despite everything, I'm not cruel. 90 days? Karen gasped. Where will we go? That's for you to figure out. You're adults. As you wanted to discuss things like adults, Ray's got his contracting business. You've got your job at the hospital. Between the two of you, you should manage. And if we contest the will. Ray's voice was cold. Then you get nothing. No 90 days, no china set for Karen, no car for Tyler. Nothing. Your choice. I turned to Tyler. You're welcome to stay while you figure things out. The house is big enough. And your family the kind that matters. Tyler nodded, tears in his eyes. Thanks. This isn't over, Ray said. You can't just, it is over. I pulled the spirit of the bench tighter around me. Armor for this final battle. It's been over since the night you put your hands on a new homeowner for refusing to feed your ego. You just didn't know it yet. I headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and the bench. It's mine. Bought with my money, sat on for my achievements, symbolic of my freedom from people like you. You want it so badly because it represents everything you couldn't control, couldn't take credit for, couldn't diminish. Well, guess what? You can't have it. You can't have any piece of me anymore. Lena, please, Karen. You're still my neighbor. No, I said quietly. I'm the neighbor you threw away. There's a difference. I left them there. Karen crying, Ray seething, Tyler standing straighter than I'd ever seen him. Outside the rain had stopped and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Fitting, I thought. My phone buzzed as I got in my rental car. A text from Mr. Jameson. Deed transfer complete. Congratulations, homeowner. Another from Tyler. Thank you for everything. Eleanor was right. The truth does matter. And one from an unknown number. MS. Heart, this is Rebecca Chen from the Seattle Times. We're doing a series on neighborhood estrangement and financial abuse. Would you be available for an interview? I sat in my car outside my childhood home, my house now, and considered the future. In 90 days, it would be empty of their presence but full of possibility. Maybe I'd sell it, use the money to help Tyler get established somewhere healthy. Maybe I'd renovate it, exorcise the ghosts with fresh paint and new memories. Maybe I'd donate it to a program for young homeowners escaping abusive HOAs. The bench spirit was warm around my shoulders, a reminder of how far I'd come. From a scared 21-year-old buying her first outdoor piece to a successful woman refusing to apologize for her success, it had witnessed every step of my journey, and it would witness whatever came next. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving the past behind but carrying its lessons forward. Some things were worth fighting for: truth, dignity, the right to define yourself, and some things like a $78 bench and the strength it represented were never for sale. The meeting had been their idea, but the aftermath was mine to orchestrate. I checked back into the Hampton Inn for another week, knowing there was more to be done before I could return to Denver. The house transfer was complete, but the real work was just beginning. Tyler called that evening. Things exploded after you left. Ray packed a bag and went to his sister's place. Karen's been in her room crying. I'm thinking about looking for an apartment tomorrow. Wait on that, I said. Let's meet for breakfast. Just you and me. The next morning, over pancakes at a diner that hadn't changed since high school, I laid out my proposal to Tyler. Stay in the house for the full 90 days. Save every penny you would have spent on rent. I'll charge you nothing. Use that time to figure out what you actually want to do with your life, not what Ray told you was realistic. Tyler's eyes widened. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Eleanor wanted you to have a chance at something better. This is me making sure you get it. What about Karen? Karen's a grown woman who made her choices. But if she decides to leave Ray, she can stay the 90 days too. That's as generous as I'm prepared to be. Tyler nodded, slowly processing. You know he's not going to leave quietly, right? Ray doesn't handle losing well. I thought about the security cameras I'd already ordered for the property. Let me worry about Ray. That afternoon I met with a property management company. If I was going to be an unwilling landlord for 3 months, I'd do it properly. They'd handle any maintenance issues, collect documentation, and serve as a buffer between me and whatever drama unfolded. By Tuesday, my phone had accumulated 17 missed calls from Ray and 43 texts ranging from threats to pleas to incoherent rage. I screenshot everything, forwarding it all to Mr. Jameson just in case. The call from Rebecca Martinez at the Seattle Times came while I was reviewing security system quotes. Your blog post has really resonated with our readers, she said. We'd like to do a deeper piece on financial abuse within neighborhoods, and your story perfectly illustrates patterns we're seeing nationwide. I agreed to the interview, but only if we could do it over video. I wanted to be back in Denver in my own space when I told the story again. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor. Aunt Patricia stood at my hotel room door with a bottle of wine and a grim expression. Thought you could use this, she said, holding up the bottle. We sat on the small balcony drinking wine from hotel room cups while she filled in gaps I'd never known. Your Karen was different before, Patricia said. When your mentor was alive, she was confident, independent, had opinions, but after he died, it's like she forgot how to make decisions. Ray showed up right when she was most vulnerable. That doesn't excuse what she let happen. No, and it doesn't. I tried to tell her when you left that she was making a mistake. She said I didn't understand the pressure of being a single president. Maybe I didn't. But I understood that you don't sacrifice one homeowner's safety for another's stability. Did you know Eleanor left me the house? Patricia smiled. I helped her find Mr. Jameson. She came to me after last Christmas. Said she'd had enough of watching Ray treat her home like his personal kingdom. She wanted to make sure you got what was rightfully yours. Why didn't anyone tell me what was happening? That she was sick. She wasn't sick, honey. Heart attack in her sleep. And as for telling you Karen had everyone convinced you wanted nothing to do with the neighborhood, she'd forward your texts about the money you sent but edit out anything personal. Made it seem like you were just fulfilling an obligation. The manipulation ran deeper than I'd realized. Karen had been curating my image to the neighborhood as carefully as she'd erased me from it. Thursday morning brought legal documents from Ray's lawyer, actually just a paralegal friend who'd drawn up a threatening letter. I forwarded it to Mr. Jameson, who responded within an hour. Amateur hour. I'll handle this. Tyler texted updates throughout the day. Karen had started packing. Ray had come by to get more clothes and ended up in a screaming match with her in the driveway. The neighbors were starting to notice the drama. By Friday I was exhausted. The emotional labor of managing this crisis from a hotel room was wearing on me. But then something shifted. My blog post had been picked up by a larger platform and messages poured in from strangers sharing their own stories. A woman in Michigan who'd supported her family through nursing school only to be called selfish for moving away for a better job. A man in Florida whose parents demanded he pay back the cost of raising him when he came into an inheritance. Story after story of adult children treated like ATMs by the very people who should have celebrated their success. I started a spreadsheet tracking common themes. Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, the weaponization of neighborhood values to justify exploitation. By the time I finished, I had enough data for a dozen articles. That evening Tyler called with news. Karen left, packed up this morning, and went to stay with her friend Carol. She left Ray a note saying she needs time to think. How do you feel about that? Honestly, relieved. Maybe without him constantly in her ear, she'll remember who she used to be. Maybe, I said, though I doubted it. Some people were too comfortable in their cages to ever really leave them. Saturday was supposed to be my last day in town, but something made me drive by the house one more time. Ray's truck was in the driveway, and I could see him through the window pacing and gesturing wildly on the phone. I parked across the street and called Tyler. Is he supposed to be there? No. Karen took her key back, and I changed the locks yesterday like you suggested. Call the police. Report a break-in. I'm recording everything from here. What followed was almost anticlimactic. 2 patrol cars arrived within 10 minutes. Ray tried to bluster his way through an explanation claiming he still lived there, that this was all a misunderstanding. But Tyler calmly showed the officers the deed transfer, explained the 90-day notice, and mentioned the changed locks. Ray was escorted off the property with a warning about trespassing. He shot me a look of pure venom as he drove away, but I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, just a tired sort of vindication. That night I sat in my hotel room wearing the black outfit one last time on this trip. I'd built an entire life in pieces, bought with my own money, achievements earned with my own effort, in spaces where no one could slam me into door frames for speaking my truth. The bench had been my first declaration of independence, purchased with hope and sat on with defiance. Now it was just a bench, well-made classic, a little worn at the seams but still perfectly mine. The power had never been in the wood. It had always been in the girl who refused to give it back. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Found something in Eleanor's room. She had a box of photos of you from graduation. Your first job. That tech conference. Karen must have sent them to her over the years. Want me to save them for you? Yes, I typed back, throat tight with unexpected emotion. So Karen had shared those moments with Eleanor even while erasing me from the neighborhood narrative. People were complicated, I realized, capable of cruelty and care in the same breath, of love and betrayal intertwined like DNA strands. But understanding didn't mean forgiving, and forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. I'd spent 11 years building a life that didn't require either. Tomorrow I'd fly back to Denver, back to my real life. The interview with the Seattle Times would run next week, possibly sparking more stories, more connections, more truth-telling. The house would sort itself out with Tyler as my eyes and ears. Ray would rage and threaten and eventually slink away to find some other neighborhood to terrorize. Karen would either find her backbone or remain bent forever. None of that was my responsibility anymore. I pulled out my laptop and started writing a follow-up blog post. The bench is just a bench. The money was just money. The house is just a house. But the story of a girl who bought her freedom for $78 and refused to sell it back at any price. That's what matters. That's what lasts. That's what can't be taken away. No matter how hard anyone tries. To everyone who messaged me this week. Your bench matters. Your freedom matters. Your truth matters. Don't give it back. Not for neighborhood, not for guilt, not for any amount of money. Some things aren't for sale. Keep your receipts, tell your stories, sit on your armor, and never ever apologize for surviving. I posted it at midnight, watching the first comments roll in. By morning, I'd be home. The black bench would go back in my yard, waiting for the next presentation, the next milestone, the next moment when I needed to remember who I was and how far I'd come. But its work here was done. I'd stood in my childhood neighborhood wearing my own success and told the truth they'd tried to bury with me at 21. I'd refused to give back what was mine. Not just the bench, but my dignity, my story, my right to exist without apology. Eleanor would have been proud. Back in Denver, I tried to return to normal life, but the reverberations from that week in Aurora kept coming. My blog post had gone viral. Really viral. Major news outlets were picking up the story, framing it as part of a larger conversation about neighborhood financial abuse and the hidden costs of toxic relationships. My work inbox was flooded with interview requests, and my personal email overflowed with stories from others who'd lived similar experiences. I spent evenings reading through them, seeing my own pain reflected in hundreds of variations. Then came the call that changed everything. Ms. Hart, this is Sandra Phillips from the Denver District Attorney's Office. We've received some concerning information about your neighborhood situation, particularly regarding an incident from 2013. My stomach dropped. What kind of information? A neighbor of Karen's, Mrs. Chun, came forward after reading your story in the Times. She has video footage from her security camera that she believes captured an assault. She says she's held on to it all these years, waiting for you to come forward. Mrs. Chin. I barely remembered her, an elderly woman who lived across the street, always tending her garden. She'd waved at me sometimes when I'd leave for work, but we'd never really talked. What exactly does the video show? I asked, though I already knew. It appears to show an adult male forcing a young homeowner against a door frame. The audio is limited, but it's concerning. We'd like you to come in and review it. Help us determine if you'd like to pursue criminal charges against Ray. The possibility had never even occurred to me. I'd been so focused on surviving, then thriving, that justice had seemed like an impossible luxury. The statute of limitations for assault on a homeowner in Colorado. We have 10 years. You're still within the window. Barely. I agreed to meet with them the following Monday, then sat in my living room trying to process this development. Somewhere out there, Mrs. Chun had kept evidence of the worst night of my life, waiting for me to be ready to use it. Tyler called an hour later, breathless. Lena, you need to know Ray's been calling around trying to get people to write character statements for some kind of legal thing. And Karen called me crying, begging me to ask you not to do whatever you're planning. I haven't decided anything yet, I said truthfully. But Tyler, there might be video evidence of that night, of what Ray did. Silence. Then good. I hope you bury him. The weekend passed in a blur of legal research and soul searching. Part of me wanted to let it go, to move forward without looking back. But another part, the 21-year-old who'd driven away in the dark, bruised and afraid, wanted Ray to face consequences for once in his life. Monday morning, I sat in a small viewing room at the DA's office watching grainy security footage from 11 years ago. There I was, 21 and defiant, standing in the driveway. There was Ray storming out of the house, grabbing my arm. The camera angle caught it all, him dragging me to the door. The moment of impact, my body hitting the frame. It's assault, clear as day, the ADA said. With the video evidence and your testimony, we have a strong case, but I need to be honest. These cases can be difficult. He'll likely plea down to a lesser charge. Might not serve any jail time. The question is whether it's worth it to you to go through the process. I thought about Tyler still trying to break free from Ray's influence about other kids in that neighborhood who might be suffering in silence about Mrs. Chun, who'd saved this evidence for over a decade, believing that someday it would matter. Yes, I said it's worth it. The news of Ray's arrest made the local paper's Aurora man charged with assault after viral blog post leads to video evidence. Karen called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer any of them. But Tyler did, and he reported back. She's a mess. Keep saying you're destroying the neighborhood. That Ray's not perfect, but he doesn't deserve this. I told her the neighborhood was destroyed 11 years ago when she chose him over you. How did she respond to that? She hung up on me, but Carol, Karen's friend, she called me later, said Karen's been different lately, questioning things. Maybe this will finally break Ray's hold on her. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks out. I threw myself into preparation, working with the prosecutor to build the strongest case possible. The video was damning, but they wanted more character witnesses, documentation of the pattern of control and abuse. That's when the unexpected allies started emerging. First was Tyler, who provided a detailed statement about years of Ray's controlling behavior. Then Aunt Patricia, who documented her concerns and emails to friends over the years. Even some former neighbors came forward with stories of things they'd witnessed but hadn't known how to address. But the biggest surprise was the letter that arrived at my lawyer's office 3 weeks before the hearing. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. Karen had written in shaky handwriting, but I need you to know that I see it now. All of it. What he was. What I let him do. What I let him take from us. I'm prepared to testify if it helps. I know it's too late to be the president you needed then. But maybe I can at least tell the truth now. I stared at the letter for a long time, trying to feel something. Vindication, hope. But all I felt was tired. Some bridges once burned couldn't be rebuilt. They could only be acknowledged as ash. The hearing arrived on a Tuesday morning. I wore a charcoal suit, professional, serious adult, but underneath I wore a black silk blouse that had been cut from the same bolt of fabric as the bench cover. A friend who worked in fashion had helped me track it down, a small piece of continuity with the girl who'd bought her first armor. Ray looked smaller in the courtroom, older. His lawyer tried to paint the video as a misunderstanding. A moment of neighborhood discipline taken out of context, but the footage spoke for itself. So did Tyler's testimony about the pattern of control. So did the neighbors who'd come forward. And then Karen took the stand. She looked fragile, diminished, like grief had hollowed her out from the inside. But her voice was steady as she recounted that night, admitting she'd stood by and watched, too afraid of losing her security to protect her community. I failed my neighbor, she said, looking directly at me for the first time in years. I chose my own comfort over her safety, and I've been paying for that choice every day since, even if I was too stubborn to admit it. Ray's face went purple as she continued detailing years of financial control, emotional manipulation, and the ways he'd systematically isolated our neighborhood from support systems. It was the testimony of a woman finally waking up from a long, terrible sleep. In the end, Ray took a plea deal, 18 months probation, anger management classes, and a permanent restraining order keeping him away from both Tyler and me. It wasn't the dramatic justice my 21-year-old self might have wanted, but it was something, a record, accountability, truth spoken in a court of law. Outside the courthouse, Karen approached me tentatively. "Lena, I said gently but firmly. "I'm glad you told the truth. I'm glad you're getting help, but we can't go back. Too much has happened." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I'm so sorry. And I'm so proud of who you've become despite everything." "Not despite," I corrected. "Because I became who I am because I had to. Because you and Ray left me no other choice." Tyler was waiting by my rental car, a duffel bag at his feet. He was moving to Denver, starting fresh with a job at a tech startup I'd helped him connect with. The house would be sold. The proceeds split, according to Eleanor's will, giving him enough for a real start. "You ready?" I asked. "Yeah, just thank you for everything, for showing me there was another way to live." As we drove away from Aurora, I thought about circles closing and new ones beginning. The bench that started it all was retired, now sitting in my yard like a museum piece, but its work was done. It had carried me from scared homeowner to successful adult, from silence to truth-telling, from victim to whatever I was now. Survivor seemed too small a word. The blog had become a book deal. The story had become a movement. The 47,000 had become evidence in a civil suit my lawyer was building. But most importantly, the 21-year-old girl who'd bought a bench with her first paycheck had become a woman who understood that some things were worth more than money, more than neighborhood peace, more than comfortable lies. She'd learned that sometimes the most expensive thing you could do was stay silent, and the most valuable thing you could own was your own truth. Worn like armor, black as night and twice as strong. The meeting request came through my assistant on a Thursday morning 6 months after the hearing. Your Karen would like to schedule a time to meet. She says it's about the house sale and some items of your Eleanor's. I stared at the message, surprised she'd gone through professional channels rather than trying to text or call directly. Maybe she was finally learning about boundaries. Schedule it for next Tuesday, 2 p.m. At the Marriott downtown. I told my assistant, conference room B, and please arrange for security to be present. Tyler had warned me she'd been trying to reach out through him, but he'd held firm. He was thriving in Denver, sharing an apartment with 2 other young professionals taking night classes in computer science. The sale of the house had given him breathing room to figure out who he was without Ray's shadow looming over every decision. Tuesday arrived crisp and bright. I dressed carefully, a navy suit, this time professional armor for a different kind of battle. In my briefcase, I carried the folder I'd been assembling for months. Bank statements, transfer records, a printed copy of every text message asking for money over the past decade. Karen was already waiting when I arrived, and the sight of her stopped me short. She'd lost weight. Her hair was its natural gray, and she wore a simple cardigan instead of the overdone outfits Ray had always insisted on. She looked smaller, older, more real than I'd seen her in years. Thank you for seeing me, she said quietly. I sat across from her, the conference table between us like a moat. You said this was about Eleanor's things. Partly. She pulled out a manila envelope. These are the items from her safety deposit box that belong to your mentor. I thought I knew she'd want you to have them. I took the envelope but didn't open it. And the other part. She pulled out her checkbook, hands trembling slightly. I've been going through our finances. My finances. Now I found records of all the money you sent over the years. 47,832. That's correct. I want to pay you back. I leaned back, studying her. With what money and why now? The house sale after Tyler's portion and the legal fees left me with about 60,000. I've been staying with Carol, working extra shifts. I don't deserve to keep money that was taken from you under false pretenses. It wasn't taken. I sent it willingly. Did you? Her eyes met mine, clearer than I'd seen them in years. Or did I manipulate you with guilt and the illusion of neighborhood obligation while giving nothing in return? The honesty was jarring. This wasn't the Karen I knew, the one who spoke in justifications and revisions. What happened to you? I asked. She almost smiled. Therapy happened, court-ordered for Ray, voluntary for me. Turns out when you spend 15 years with someone who controls every aspect of your life, you forget how to think for yourself. The therapist. She's helping me remember who I was before, who I might still be able to become. And who is that? I don't know yet, but I know who I don't want to be anymore. The woman who chose a man's comfort over her neighbor's safety. The woman who erased her first mentor's memory to accommodate her second husband's ego. The woman who her voice cracked, who stood in that yard and watched her new neighbor get hurt and did nothing. I let the silence stretch, processing this version of my Karen, accountable, self-aware, seemingly genuine in her regret. The money, she continued, writing out a check. It's not enough. Nothing could be enough, but it's what I can do now. I don't want your money. Then donate it. Burn it. Frame it as a reminder of what not to do. But I can't keep it. Every dollar represents a moment I failed you, a time I took advantage of your success while resenting you for it. She slid the check across the table. 47,832. Everything I'd given. Returned. What about Ray? I asked. Her face hardened. The restraining order violation landed him in jail for 30 days. His sister posted bail, but he's staying with her now. The divorce will be final next month. You're divorcing him? I should have divorced him 11 years ago. The moment he laid hands on you, but I was a coward then. I'm trying not to be one now. I picked up the check studying it. This money had meant so much at different times. Survival for them. Resentment for me. Evidence of a relationship that only worked in one direction. Now it was just paper and numbers. If I take this, I said slowly, it doesn't fix anything. We don't suddenly have a relationship. The past doesn't get erased. I know. I'm not trying to buy forgiveness. I'm trying to balance the scales. Maybe to stop taking from you even if I can never give back what really matters. I folded the check and put it in my briefcase. I'll donate it. There's a program for teens aging out of foster care. Helps them get established. Seems appropriate. Karen nodded, tears streaming down her face. Your mentor would have liked that. He always wanted to help kids who didn't have advantages. Tell me about him, I said suddenly. The real him, not Ray's version. For the next hour she talked about David Hart, respiratory therapist, amateur guitarist, the man who cried when I was born and spent hours just holding me. Who'd been driving home from a double shift to help pay for their new house when a drunk driver ran a red light. Who'd been planning to take me to the zoo that weekend for the first time. He would have been so proud of you, she finished. The way you stood up for yourself, the career you built, the person you became, he was like that, determined, principled. You get that from him. I wish I remembered him. You were so young, but sometimes the way you'd set your jaw when you were concentrating or how you'd hum while working, pure David. Ray hated those moments. I think because they reminded him that you were never really his to control. We sat in silence for a moment, sharing the grief of what should have been a mentor who lived, a president who protected a neighborhood that chose love over control. I should go, Karen said, finally gathering her purse. Thank you for seeing me, for listening. Karen, I called as she reached the door. She turned, hope flickering in her eyes. I'm glad you're getting help. I hope you find who you're supposed to be. Maybe, she said softly. I'll start with trying to be the president you deserved, even if it's too late for us. Maybe I can learn to be better for someone else. Volunteer work, perhaps with kids who need advocates. That sounds like a good start. She left and I sat in the conference room alone, processing. The check in my briefcase felt heavier than its paper weight, $47,000 worth of complicated history. Converted into hope for kids who needed what I'd had to provide for myself. That evening Tyler came over for dinner at my apartment. I told him about the meeting, showed him the check. She's really trying, he said, surprised. Maybe, or maybe this is just another performance. Time will tell. You don't trust her. I don't trust anyone who's shown me who they are that clearly, but I can appreciate the effort, and I can hope she becomes someone better even if it's not for my benefit. We ate Thai food and talked about his classes, his new girlfriend, the life he was building free from Ray's shadow. He was seeing a therapist too, unpacking years of being told he was worthless without Ray's guidance. I've been thinking about that bench, he said suddenly. The famous bench, what it represented. What about it? I want to buy something like that. Not a bench, obviously, but something that's just mine. That represents my freedom. Maybe a really good laptop for school. Something I choose, I pay for, I earn. That sounds perfect. Will you help me pick it out? You know about computers and symbolic purchases. I smiled. Of course. After he left, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to accompany the donation check. I told them about a 21-year-old girl who'd bought a bench with her first paycheck, who'd been forced to leave home for refusing to call a violent man sir, who'd built a life anyway. I asked them to use the money for kids facing similar impossible choices, who needed their own version of a $78 bench, something that belonged only to them, that represented a future beyond their current circumstances. Then I opened the envelope Karen had given me. Inside were photos of my mentor. I'd never seen his hospital ID badge, a guitar pick, and a letter he'd written to me before I was born. My little one, you're not even here yet. But I already love you more than words can say. I promise to protect you, to support your dreams, to make sure you always know your worth. The world can be hard sometimes, but you'll never face it alone. Love, Dad. I cried then for the protection I'd never received, the support I'd had to find elsewhere, the promises broken by a drunk driver on a random Tuesday night, but also for the strength I'd found anyway, the dreams I'd supported myself, the worth I'd learned to recognize without anyone's validation. The black bench sat in my yard, retired but not forgotten. It had done its job, carrying me from victim to survivor to whatever I was now, someone who could sit across from her Karen and accept a check for $47,000 without flinching. Who could help her brother choose his own freedom symbol, who could donate blood money to help other kids escape. Tomorrow there would be new challenges. The book was almost finished. The speaking engagements were picking up. The civil suit against Ray was moving forward. But tonight I held my mentor's letter and felt the weight of inherited strength, the kind that couldn't be taken away by door frames or demands or the price of neighborhood peace. Some things weren't for sale. Some things couldn't be returned. And some things, like the truth, like dignity, like the right to your own story, were worth everything you had to pay to keep them. The civil suit concluded on a rainy Thursday in April, nearly a year after everything began. Ray had fought it, initially hiring lawyers he couldn't afford, making threats he couldn't follow through on. But security footage, bank records, and witness testimonies have a way of making even the most belligerent people face reality. The judge awarded me $30,000 in damages. Not the full amount I'd sought, but enough to make a statement. Ray was also ordered to pay my legal fees and issued a permanent injunction against contacting me or Tyler. He'd aged visibly during the proceedings, his bluster replaced by a sullen acceptance that his kingdom had crumbled. I donated the settlement money to the same program that had received Karen's repayment. The director called to thank me personally, telling me they'd use the funds to create the Independence Award, a grant for young adults escaping abusive homes to purchase professional outdoor furniture for job interviews. "We're calling it the Black Bench Fund," she said, "after your story. Is that okay?" "It's perfect," I told her, throat tight with emotion. The book released in June to reviews that called it searingly honest and a necessary examination of neighborhood financial abuse. The tour took me to 15 cities where I met hundreds of people who'd lived variations of my story. They brought their own symbolic items: a secondhand patio set, a community college ID card, a pair of shoes that had walked them out of hell. Tyler came to my Denver launch bringing his girlfriend and the laptop he'd bought himself, top of the line, paid for with his own money from his new job as a junior developer. He was taking night classes in cybersecurity, following a path I'd helped illuminate, but walking it entirely on his own terms. "I've been accepted to the bachelor's program," he told me after the reading. "Full-time starting in fall. I'm giving notice at the warehouse next week." "That's amazing. How are you feeling about it?" "Terrified. Excited. Free." He grinned. "I finally get why you held on to that bench. When you buy your own future, no one can take it back." Karen didn't come to the launch, but she sent a card. "Proud of you. Proud of your truth. Working on my own." Patricia told me Karen had started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, using her experience to help other women recognize the signs of financial control. She was living in a small apartment now, working full-time, attending therapy twice a week, building something that might eventually resemble a life. The speaking engagements grew from bookstores to conferences. I found myself on panels about economic abuse, talking to rooms full of social workers and policymakers about the hidden ways neighborhoods can trap their residents in cycles of exploitation. The bench always came with me, carefully folded in my suitcase, though I rarely sat on it anymore. It had become more symbol than furniture, more talisman than armor. One evening, after a particularly intense panel at a women's leadership conference, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 20, clutching a worn backpack. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she whispered. "My neighborhood, it's like your story but different. They control everything. Take my paychecks. Tell me I owe them for raising me. But I've been saving secretly. I bought interview clothes at Goodwill. I have a job lined up 2 states away." "You're brave," I told her. "I'm scared." "That's okay. Brave and scared aren't opposites. They're often the same thing." She hugged me, then fierce and quick, before disappearing into the crowd. I never learned her name, but I thought about her often, another girl with her own version of a black bench, writing her own escape story. The final house closing was scheduled for October 1st. I flew back to Denver from a speaking engagement in Seattle. Tyler meeting me at the property for one last walkthrough. The rooms were empty now, echoing with possibilities rather than memories. It looks bigger without their stuff, Tyler observed. Everything does once you clear out what doesn't belong. We stood in the kitchen by the door frame that had changed everything. The wood was scuffed, ordinary, just a transition between rooms, not the monument to violence it had been in my nightmares for over a decade. You okay? Tyler asked. Yeah, it's just a doorway. The new owners were a young family expecting their second child. They had plans to renovate the kitchen, update the bathrooms, fill the space with new laughter. I liked thinking of children growing up here who would only know door frames as passages to somewhere better. That night in my apartment overlooking the Denver skyline, I took the black bench from my yard one last time. It was showing its age, a pulled thread here, fading there. 11 years of symbolism had left their mark. I laid it on my patio, smoothing the wood. Tomorrow I'd take it to the Textile Preservation Department at the Denver Art Museum. They'd accepted it as part of their contemporary culture collection, an artifact of resilience in material form. School groups would see it. Read the placard about economic abuse and neighborhood estrangement and the price of freedom. But tonight it was still just my bench. The one I'd bought with hope and sat on with defiance. The one Ray had demanded back as if he could claim my independence by claiming my furniture. The one that had been worth so much more than $78, though that had been everything I'd had to spend. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but the area code was familiar. This is your Karen. I wanted you to know I told my therapy group about the bench today, about why I wanted it back. It was never about the bench. It was about control, about trying to pull you back into a life where I had power. I see that now. I'm sorry it took me so long. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Thank you for seeing it. That matters. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I love you. I know that doesn't fix anything, but it's true. I didn't respond. Some truths came too late to change anything, even if they were real. But I didn't delete the message either. The book tour would resume next week. There were talks of a documentary, perhaps a podcast series exploring other stories like mine. The Black Bench Fund had helped 17 young people so far, each buying their own piece of independence. Tyler was thriving. Karen was trying. Ray was someone else's problem now. And me, I was standing in my own apartment. Successful beyond 21-year-old Lena's wildest dreams. Surrounded by a life I'd built from scratch. The girl who'd bought a bench with her first paycheck had become a woman who understood that freedom wasn't something you purchased once, it was something you chose every day, over and over, no matter the cost. Tomorrow the bench would become history. But tonight it was still mine, a reminder that some things, dignity, truth, the right to leave what harms you, are never for sale, no matter who thinks they own you. I raised a glass of wine to the bench, to the girl who'd bought it, to everyone still saving for their own escape, to Mrs. Chun, who'd kept the evidence, to Eleanor, who'd kept the faith, to Tyler, who'd found his courage. Even to Karen, who might yet find her way to someone worth being. The city lights sparkled beyond my windows. Each one a story, a struggle, a hope. Somewhere out there someone was planning their escape. Someone was buying their first piece of freedom. Someone was learning that neighborhood isn't always rules. That love isn't always control. That staying isn't always strength. To all of them I offered the only wisdom I had. Your bench is out there. Your freedom is possible. Your truth matters. Don't give it back. Not for anyone. Not for any price. Not ever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below and share your thoughts about Lena's journey. If the story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And if you want more people to hear this story, please hit the like button to help it reach others who might need to hear that their freedom is worth fighting for. Your support means everything. Until next time, keep writing your own story.